Okay, we are live.
We are.
Hey, everybody, welcome to the show. This is the part where I should give some wonderful spiel about what we have going on tonight and how wonderful it's going to be, so you should hang around and watch. Tonight, that's not what you're getting. So, hang around and see how crazy this is going to be, because we have no plan as to what we're going to do. So, with me tonight, though, I have the one and only
Clinton Wilcox. I went with my real name over here because there was some question about whether or not my video was going to work. That we had those fires going throughout California and the creek fires nearby because we live in Fresno County, and so for the past couple weeks I haven't been able to use my video on Zoom calls or anything like that. It was all real wavy and it wouldn't stay on for more than a few seconds. So there's some question about that, but thankfully I seem to be back in full effect here.
Glad to hear that. There, when you weren't able to do any video, I certainly had concerns that you'd been replaced by a doppelganger, or something along those lines. It was certainly a concern.
Yeah, I was afraid I was going to get replaced by a silhouetted figure.
Yeah, that happens all too often.
Yeah.
So, to give listeners a little bit of a rundown why we're doing this show tonight, we're not just doing it no rhyme or reason. We had an episode planned. Our guest is a little under the weather, so we're pushing that episode back till next week. So be sure to be on the lookout for that. We're going to be discussing the topic of hell, and specifically Evan Minton's new book, Yahweh's Inferno. So we're going to be discussing that next weekend.
We're going to discuss hell, but are we going to discuss high water?
Maybe we'll see.
Yeah.
I'm not sure how much the book goes into that, but it's certainly a possibility.
Right. Yeah, actually, Anne Berlin, one of my favorite bands, had a song called "Hell or High Water." Annihilation is kind of a pretty controversial view. It's not unorthodox necessarily, as far as I can tell. So it's not like Evan is outside of Christian orthodoxy, but it's a they say that it's a growing movement. I don't know if that's actually true, but I do know a couple of people who hold to annihilation, and I've been engaging with them a little bit. It's not a position I've looked into very much or very intensely or in depth. So, I'm looking forward to having that conversation with Evan, getting to know what his arguments are for annihilation, and getting to interact with that a little bit.
Yeah, me too. It's one of those positions that I'm rather undecided on. I deal a lot with cult groups, and so I've encountered this specifically with the Jehovah's Witnesses. They have an annihilationist viewpoint, but it's one of those things that we've easily been able to set aside, because it's like I don't see this as a critical issue. It's something Orthodox believers can disagree with each other on without having to call heresy.
Right. Yeah, it's one of those non-essentials that we're told to be charitable on. It's just one of those things where we might get to heaven and realize, oh, I was wrong about that.
Yeah, very true. Or if you end up not being saved, then you might not know about that. So
well, yeah, right.
So that's going to be our fun topic, hopefully next weekend. Tonight, we decided we'd go ahead and hop on here for a little bit and do a live Q&A for any listeners that are on, and just shoot the breeze a little bit, discussing whatever comes up.
Who's Christina?
Christina? I don't know a Christina.
Yeah, it says real live Christina Q&A.
Oh no, I did not misspell that bad, did I?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Wow. That's the kind of day it is. That's what I get having
Right.
3 kids crawling over me.
Yeah.
Well, is it the title or the thumbnail?
It's the title. It's right next to that cute little
Fantastic.
goose that's up on the top.
I guarantee you I can't change that either. Let's see. Oh yeah, I see now.
Yep.
Let's see if that works. Hey, well, hopefully there will be some Christinas out there that will like pop in because they saw that and
Oh yeah.
thought this was all about them. Oh
Right.
boy, temporarily unavailable. So I might not be able to save that while we're live. We'll see. Ugh. It's like it wants me to change it, but it's not.
Mm.
So I've got the banner up. So, if you have questions, drop them in chat. In the meantime, we'll just kind of chat about whatever comes to mind. So, what's been going on with your week?
Well, not a whole lot. We're still locked down here in California. I don't know. I've heard some other places are open, but California, no dice. Our dictator in chief has said that we're going to remain locked down for the foreseeable future. So that there's that. But on Thursday, I did a book review of a book by my friend Mark Newman, who wrote a book called Contenders, which is a really, really good book about the pro-life movement and what kinds of things an individual pro-life advocate can do to improve the chances that they'll be able to be a lot more persuasive when they talk to pro-choice people. And so you can go to the Life Training Institute website, to the blog, and see my book review there. I've also reviewed it on Amazon and Goodreads, so you can find my reviews there. If you're on Goodreads, feel free to add me as a friend there, and you can see all my reviews. But that's the most recent book I've reviewed, and it's a very, very good one.
Cool. Well, I'm gonna have to add you on Goodreads now. So.
Okay, cool. Yeah, and
that'll be awesome.
Yeah, and I was at Target earlier today and discovered that Metallica has a new live album out.
The one with the San Francisco orchestra, right?
Symphony, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, called S&M 2.
Yeah.
Which I believe stands for Symphony and Metal, but there's that obvious double entendre there.
Right. That's a good album. I liked it.
Yeah, I've heard a few tracks off the first one. Yeah, I've heard it's a really good album. I don't have that one just yet, but I picked up the second one. I'm not really a huge fan of Metallica, but I do really enjoy albums where a rock or metal band combine their efforts with a symphony orchestra, because I am a classically trained musician, so I do listen to a lot of classical music too. I also enjoy some modern styles. I don't really care for pop music, but I enjoy rock and some metal, depending. There's a point at which metal becomes just noise, but I do like some styles of metal, especially progressive metal, progressive rock, that kind of thing. So if a rock band combines their efforts with a symphony orchestra, that's kind of the best of both worlds for me. I get the classical element and I get the more modern rock / metal element. So I went ahead and picked up S&M 2 and listened to a few tracks before we did the recording tonight. So far it's pretty good.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it. I especially love, anytime kind of symphony stuff is incorporated. Blind Guardian has been one of my favorite bands for a long time. I really enjoy their stuff. But this album was good. I'm not a huge Metallica fan, but I enjoyed it enough. And there for a little while, when my son was 3.5, 4, Creeping Death became his favorite track for a while. So,
okay,
which of course that has lots of biblical connotations with it being the story of the plagues in Egypt.
Is that a Metallica track?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, yeah, because I've heard that the lead singer Hetfield, James Hetfield, I've heard that he's the son of a preacher, so that would make sense, considering that song.
Yeah, Creeping Death is it. I mean, it just goes right through the plagues. It's about the angel of death is the creeping death. So,
okay,
it's pretty cool song. If you know the Bible behind it.
Hmm.
All right, so we are getting some questions coming in. So
Yeah.
let's veer off to this. So first off, looking for Furchess and Nick Peters
For Fritz Joels and Pete
or
Knickers.
Pete Knickers. Yeah.
I don't think I've ever been on a podcast here with Mentionables where Nick made it to the podcast.
No,
Has he ever done the
no.
podcast? Or
He's done the podcast before. He's never made it on one of our live streams since we've been doing this,
okay,
but he's been on the podcast a number of times.
okay,
So,
yeah,
yeah, he's one of those contributors who does a lot behind the scenes, and I know he's involved with his own ministry a good bit too. So,
yeah.
but
And
one day we'll find the topic that he won't be able to resist coming on
well,
for.
virgin birth,
We'll
obviously.
reel him in. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, exactly.
yeah. We'll just say, hey, Nick, I heard you don't affirm the virgin birth, and then he'll have to come on and defend his honor.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. That's a good plan.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks. Yeah.
And
And Joel just kind of had some work he had to get done with school. When it turned out that our guest was sick, he opted to get some work done. So he may join us a little bit later if he has time.
we'll see. Who knows? The link's out there for everybody, so they may hop on and see this and decide they just have to come on
Right.
and participate. So
Yeah.
but here's one that will be good for you, Clinton.
A question that's a bit more substantive.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
So, is there any situation in which abortion would be justifiable?
Yeah. So before I could answer that question, I first need to kind of explain what the pro-life position is. The pro-life position is that it is always wrong to intentionally kill an innocent human being. And so you could put it in the form of a syllogism for those who are logically inclined. All acts that intentionally kill an innocent human being are wrong. Premise two, abortion is an act which intentionally kills an innocent human being. Premise, or the conclusion would be that abortion is wrong. So if both of those premises are true, then that means that any situation in which we kill an innocent human being and intentionally kill an innocent human being would be wrong. So that means that any situation regarding the woman's socioeconomic status, things like she wants to continue school, she's afraid she might have to cut her hours at work. Her boyfriend or husband is threatened to leave her. All of these situations are not situations which would justify killing an unborn child. And of course, this is all contingent on the unborn, the embryo/fetus being a full-fledged human being. And that's an argument that pro-life people make. And so just because of the question, I'm kind of assuming that the unborn is a full human being. I can obviously defend that, but just for the purpose of this question, I'm assuming that so that I can answer the question specifically. So socioeconomic reasons, things like overpopulation wouldn't justify it because we can't kill people outside the womb for these reasons. So we also can't kill someone inside the womb. And of course, there are a lot of resources available for an abortion-minded woman who needs some financial assistance. There are a lot of pregnancy care centers that can help with that. But then, of course, you have the more difficult cases, rape being one that is often brought up. But again, if it's wrong to intentionally kill an innocent human being, then we can't justify an abortion in the case of rape. No, that doesn't mean that we lack compassion for the woman who is raped. Obviously, she's gone through a very traumatic situation, and she needs to be referred for proper counseling. In fact, Warren Hearn, a late-term abortionist, has written a book called Abortion Practice, which is one of the most widely used textbooks on doing abortions. And in that textbook, he even says that a woman will not find healing after a rape in the abortionist's office. Now, of course, he would say that you need to do the abortion because Warren Hearn thinks that just any reason a woman wants to not be pregnant is a medically indicated abortion. I think he's obviously wrong about that, but he's also honest about, having an abortion is not going to help this woman. She needs to be referred to for proper counseling. So if the unborn is a full human being, we can't justify killing them, even though there's a very difficult situation going on. That's not a lack of compassion for the woman. It's just an unwillingness to commit murder of the unborn human being. And so regarding are there any situation in which abortion would be justifiable, I would say that if the pregnancy becomes life-threatening, abortion is permissible with a few caveats. And we can justify this a couple of ways. The number one, there's the situation of triage. If two patients are mortally wounded and you can only save one, you save the patient that has the greater chance of survival. Because if you try to save the one who is injured more severely, you might end up losing both. So in this case, if the mother dies, both the embryo and the mother will die. But if you save the mother's life, the embryo might still die. And so you have a situation here where if you try to preserve the life of the embryo, you'll end up losing them both. But if you try to preserve the life of the mother, then you can at least save one life. You don't have to lose them both. Now, we also have to remember, though, that a good end does not justify a bad means. We can't commit murder even if it's for a good purpose. Like when I talked about the situation of rape, we can't justify killing someone because of the difficult situation. So there have to be a few caveats to this. That a doctor can act in such a way as to preserve the woman's life, as long as the death of the embryo or fetus is not intended, but is merely foreseen. An example might be in an ectopic pregnancy. You can give the woman a drug to kill the embryo. It'll detach from her fallopian tube, and then the embryo will die. Well, that's a direct form of killing, so that would actually not be ethically permissible for a doctor to do, to give to the woman. Because in that case, you're intending the death of the embryo to save the mother's life. So you can act in such a way that the death of the embryo is foreseen, but not intended. For example, you can use a salpingectomy, in which you actually remove a portion of the woman's fallopian tube. That is not a situation in which you're intending the death of the embryo. You're intending to save the woman's life. But the death of the embryo is foreseen by the action of removing the fallopian tube. So the death of the embryo is foreseen, but it's not intended. And secondly, you can't act in such a way as to directly kill the embryo. And so again, removing the fallopian tube, or the portion of the fallopian tube that's the offending portion, is not directly killing. The embryo will die as a result of the doctor's actions, but it won't die as a direct result of the actions. It dies indirectly by the fact that you're removing the fallopian tube and removing the embryo from that environment in which it can survive. But again, you're working to preserve the life of the mother while still treating the embryo as a second patient. You're still respecting the life and dignity of the embryo by trying to work in such a way as to ethically preserve the life of the woman. And so the later the pregnancy goes on, though, the more difficult it would be to justify that, because once the fetus becomes viable, then you can't just kill the fetus to save the woman's life. What you would actually do is you would deliver the fetus in that case. And not only is that quicker, because you'd have to remove it by C-section. That's about a 30-minute operation, whereas a late-term abortion is a 2-day operation. So it's faster just to deliver the child, but it's also safer for the woman in that case too. So it's kind of a win-win. And plus, if it's a wanted pregnancy, she's going to want the child anyway. So you wouldn't want to act in such a way that's going to result in the fetus's death. You want to deliver the child and then work to preserve its life and keep it alive if you can. So a little bit of an in-depth explanation there, but it does require a little bit of explanation. So yeah, so then with those explanations in mind, the basic principle is a doctor can act to save the woman's life in such a way that the death of the fetus is not directly caused by the doctor, and the death is foreseen but not intended by the doctor.
Makes sense. Now, to take this one step further, people bring up a lot of extreme situations here. Most of these examples are ridiculous, and you may never see anything like this. Before we go on to that, though, Mikhail has a follow-up here.
Follow-up question.
Do situations exist in practice where abortion is the only option to save the mother's life, and where the embryo cannot be saved by a C-section and an incubator?
Well, I mean, I'm not aware of any, but again, I'm not a doctor, so I can't really foresee every possible situation. All I can do is, because I study bioethics, and so I can speak to the ethics and the philosophy of the situation. But as for every single situation a woman might find herself in, I don't really know all of them. I do know quite a few. Like there's a situation called preeclampsia, which can be dangerous, but it's also possible to pull the woman through alive. So an abortion is not ever necessary to resolve preeclampsia. And so there are other situations in which you can apply these philosophical and ethical principles too, and that would be up to the doctor, because the doctor is much more qualified than I am just to say which situations would require to act in such a way that the embryo or the fetus will die. But being that I've studied the philosophy and ethics, I can speak to that portion of it. But I'm not educated as a doctor, so I couldn't give you an exhaustive list of all the situations that could arise.
And that kind of leads into my follow-up question, which although it's an extreme example,
actually, something comes to mind real quick. Sorry to interrupt. I was just going to say, just to kind of follow up on that too, because something kind of popped into my head. In that, if there is a situation where abortion is the only option and the embryo can't be saved by C-section in an incubator, and it can't be saved without directly or intentionally killing it, I would say that it would probably be, it might be unethical, but I don't think a woman should be legally required to give up her life in that situation. So she may be doing something morally wrong by opting to have an abortion, but I'm not sure we should legally prevent her from doing so. So that's kind of what I would say there, is that I don't know if we should necessarily prevent her in that case because the situation is so dire. But in most situations, we can't justify killing the embryo or fetus to resolve the situation.
That's a good point, and that does kind of lead into what I was going to say. Let's say that the father, in a given case, doesn't want to have the child and is going to give her the option of forcing her to have the abortion, or he's going to take her life. In a scenario like that, what is the ethical outcome of that sort of thing? Should she have the abortion or not?
Yeah, see, and again, something like this might be better for a pro-life counselor to respond, because this is kind of a situation of domestic abuse, and so I don't know what the best way is to resolve domestic abuse. That would be something for a licensed counselor, and I would prefer a pro-life licensed counselor, because then I know that counselor will be taking the fetus's life into account too. So I would say, just ethically, no, it would not be permissible to get the abortion. But I'm sure there must be something she would be able to do in order to get herself out of that situation, even if she has to lie that she will get the abortion and then go to the authorities to explain the situation, or however the counselor would suggest resolving that situation. Because just like with the rape example, the right thing to do is rarely the easy thing to do. And if the embryo or fetus is really a full-fledged human being, as I really don't think there's any good reason to deny, then we need to make sure we take steps to preserve it. And so if she had for example, a toddler, and her boyfriend or husband gave her a gun and basically said, look, I'm going to kill you if you don't kill your toddler, would we think it would be permissible then for her to kill her toddler? Well, I should think even in that situation, no, it would not be permissible. As difficult as it is, we would kind of expect a mother to protect her own child with her life. Now, I'm not saying that that's necessarily, this kind of situation is just difficult all around. And so, if she were to go through with killing the toddler, I don't think the law would necessarily prosecute her for that, because it does take the circumstances surrounding the act into account. So the law would probably figure that she killed the toddler under duress because her own life was being threatened. So whether or not we think it was morally wrong to kill the toddler in that situation, I don't think a judge would actually prosecute her for doing so, because they would probably take the fact that she was coerced into it by threat of losing her own life into account.
I think that's Excellent. That's what I like hearing from you on these situations, is you always take it and put it in a practical sense. So I can appreciate
Oh,
that you're able
well,
to
thank you.
do that on these scenarios. It makes it more relatable, and I think
Hmm.
it's just the most caring way to approach it.
Hmm. Well, I learned from the best in the movement. If it weren't for guys like Scott Glusendorf and Frank Beckwith and Christopher Kaiser, I wouldn't be as knowledgeable as I am on the philosophy or ethics of abortion. So, as they say, I stand on the shoulders of giants.
Well, let's see. Feel free to throw those questions out there. We can continue with this topic, or we can move on to another one. Either way is fine with us. So keep throwing those questions out there. I don't care how absurd they are.
Did
We'll discuss whatever is thrown out there.
did Adam and Eve have belly buttons? No, I'm joking.
Ooh.
That was an example of an absurd.
Well, now you need to give us your response.
Oh, my response is I have no response. I can see either either way. Obviously, they weren't conceived and born the same way we are, but were they made so that they didn't look significantly different from their own kids? Who knows? It's just speculation.
Yeah, for me, that question would largely go back to the question of origins. Are we looking at something of a special creation being through a process of theistic evolution, or are we looking at a special creation of human beings
Oh,
entirely separate?
yeah,
So
that's a good consideration too.
for me, it would come down to that.
Mhm. Yeah.
Oh, we got another one here. The best resource for dealing with Jehovah's Witnesses. That is a really good question.
Do you do a
And
lot with apologetics to Jehovah's Witnesses?
I spend a good bit of time talking with people every chance I have. I've got a few that, we talk back and forth on a regular basis. So the last 4 or 5 years, I've logged quite a few hours talking with Jehovah's Witnesses, and even a bit more in reading and researching behind the scenes.
Okay.
Um,
Well, then you'd be pretty good to answer this question then.
yeah. So first and foremost, I would say that if you're not familiar with Tactics by Greg Kokel, that's a great place to start
Yeah,
for dealing with any of these cults.
as a matter of fact, he just released an updated and expanded edition of Tactics. So now's as good a time as any to go pick it up.
Yep, and I would put that as my number one kind of resource for that, because it teaches you how to have conversations, even though it's not directly geared towards how to talk with Jehovah's Witnesses. It still gives you the tools you need to have those kind of conversations. Now, that would kind of be my first go-to on these kind of things. A couple other really good resources in this area are Kingdom of the Cults by Walter Martin. It has a very extensive section on Jehovah's Witnesses. Again, this is another book with a very recent update to it. So it's been updated with a lot of the theology changes over the last 10 years. And it really gives you the whole background and history, as well as some tactics in terms of how to have these kind of conversations with people. The other really great resource that gets a little more specific, I'm looking this up so that I have the right title here, is Reasoning from the Scriptures with Jehovah's Witnesses by Ron Rhodes. This is, again, another very excellent book that goes through a lot of the scriptural differences. And in dealing with Jehovah's Witnesses or any cult group, it's important to be familiar with kind of their resources. So, Jehovah's Witnesses use New World Translation as their primary translation. A lot of people haven't heard from it because it's essentially a Jehovah's Witness translation. It's made by their translators, and it's got a
Translators.
yeah, and we say that in quotation marks because there's definitely theological leanings that were made in the translations.
Well, I mean, they didn't actually translate from manuscripts, did they? Oh, they did.
Yeah, they did
Oh, okay.
use some manuscripts, but again,
So
their bent and theology clearly influenced where they went with it in a number of places, including
okay,
outright errors.
so it wasn't like the Mormons, where Joseph Smith allegedly put his head in a hat and uh, got the translation from the golden plates. They actually had translators looking at the manuscripts.
Right,
Oh,
right.
okay, I
They
didn't know that.
did. I believe it's been a while since I've looked at this, so I'm gonna pull up some information just to be sure. Now, one of the issues was I don't know that any of the translators they had were super advanced in terms of their training on it. So let me see
Right.
here.
Yeah, well, you look that up. I actually have a couple of books by Ron Rhodes. I have his reasoning from the scriptures with Mormons and with Catholics. So
I
never picked up
didn't
the
know he
Jehovah's
had one
Witness
on
book.
Catholics.
Yeah, he does. I mean, I've since softened on a lot of Catholic doctrines as of late. So yeah, but yeah, I picked that up because there was a time when I had a lot of friends who were pretty anti-Catholic, and so I bought some books to read them too. And I've had a lot more interactions with Mormons than with any other religious group. So I have a lot of resources on dealing with Mormons. In fact, Kingdom of the Cults is actually one of the books I have as well. Haven't read it, but I do have it on my bookshelf.
Yeah, it's a really good resource. I kind of read through it as I'm dealing with each particular group, so I haven't
Right.
read the whole thing either.
Yeah, it's like A Tale of Two Cities or Anna Karenina. It's one of those books you have on your bookshelf that you don't read, but it impresses people.
Yes, very true. It's like super thick.
Right. Yeah.
Okay, so in looking up to make sure we're giving the exact information here, the master text used in translating the Old Testament into English was Kittle's Biblia Hebrewica. I am pronouncing that awful. And then let's see here. So they did go back. They used the Leningrad Codex, Cairo Codex. They did look at some of the Dead Sea Scrolls. So one of the issues was there was only one really qualified scholar who had a lot of knowledge in the original languages. So it was a lot of people who didn't have the kind of knowledge background you'd hope for somebody who's translating from those original languages to the current. So while it is a translation, it has some significant issues with it. And a book like that by Ron Rhodes will go through a lot of those and cover that. For somebody who's not big on reading, there's some great videos out there by Mike Winger that go into dealing with Jehovah's Witnesses and the kind of conversations to have with them. There's also a couple excellent ones by Tim Barnett. So that would definitely be something worth checking out.
Tim Barnett does videos besides the Red Pin Logic?
Yeah. These are some of his old ones from back in the day.
Okay, cool. Yeah, if you haven't checked out the Red Pin Logic videos, go check those out. He does a great job with them.
Yeah, they're excellent. Very good in terms of bringing humor in on some of these issues.
Yeah.
You had mentioned Mormons as well, and I'd like to stop on that for just a minute too. One thing that I think is really important to point out to people in dealing with any of these groups is I want to try and have people sympathize for just a moment with the experiences some of these people have had. If you talk to Mormons and ask them about some of the experiences they've had in general, especially depending on which part of the country they're in, their experience with Christians is often awful. In terms of people being very quick to dive out there and call them a cult, to attack their beliefs, attacking kind of the most easy to attack parts of the belief, polygamy,
Special underwear.
special underwear, all that stuff. And they come on in such an approach that's not very loving. That's why something like tactics is so important, because you really want to understand where somebody's coming from and some of the experiences they've had, because one of the last things you want to do is to turn them off from Christianity entirely. So even if they eventually leave the group, then they've already written off all of Christianity, which is not something you want to happen. There's actually a fantastic book that's essentially a tactics for dealing with LDS members. And that is this, Sharing the Good News with Mormons. It's edited by Sean McDowell, but it's a collection of essays that covers different approaches in dealing with people.
I'm blanking on his name. I was going to ask if there was someone who wrote an essay in that book, but I'm blanking on his name. I saw a couple of his talks, because he does talks with Summit Ministries, and he has a ministry to Mormons, because he came out of Mormonism. And man, I'm blanking on his name, because I haven't seen him post on Facebook in a while. He's I believe he's an American, but teaches over at Oxford. And his name starts with K. But I'm blanking on it. Hold on, I'm gonna have to.
Yeah, pull that up. This has some great essays in it. Of course, it's got Corey Miller, J. Warner Wallace, Chip Thompson, Steve Daly, a lot of people, and I'll say this about many other writers, from a lot of the essays I've read, a good number of them have come out of Mormonism. So they really understand the Mormon perspective from how they're writing. But again, this is like a tactics for Mormon. It'd be great if there were a resource that combined some of these other things and had something like this for sharing the good news with Jehovah's Witnesses. That would be a fantastic book. Hope maybe it's in the works. Who knows?
Possibly, yeah. Okay, yeah. Kevin Bywater. Does he happen to have an essay in there?
Kevin Bywater. I did not see him. Yeah, I don't see him in here.
Okay, well, he'd be a good one if you ever see, give him a talk or something. He does a lot with Mormons, and I watched a lot of those videos of the speakers from Summit, and Kevin's was one of my favorite presentations that they did. It was a really, really good talk. So.
Well, I'm gonna have to put that on my list. Kevin Bywater.
Yeah.
I'm diving a lot back in right now to a lot of the research I've done into Mormonism. And I'm kind of back into it now. I have a few people I'm talking with and having some conversations right now, and really, really doing a deep dive with some missionaries. So, I've spent a lot of time in that area recently.
Yeah, I wonder if anyone, any Christian, has, psychologist or or apologist or philosopher or anyone has ever done any research into why people become Mormons, because I know at least one person who's actually a pretty smart guy who's a Mormon, and it seems like a person of reasonable intelligence should have some red flags about Mormonism, because number one, uh, we don't have access to these alleged golden plates that Joseph Smith translated from, but we do have ample evidence for the manuscripts of the Old and New Testament, and so that right there should give you a red flag that while we can't investigate the original manuscripts of the Old and New Testament, we have so many copies and early copies of those manuscripts that we can be confident to like 98, 99% confident that we have what was originally there, that it's been preserved. And any differences are not enough to affect a Christian doctrine, at any point. But with Mormonism, it's a pretty tall tale about Joseph Smith, someone who's not educated, in translation or ancient languages, who allegedly had these golden plates, put his head in a hat, which I've been given to understand was actually a common scam back then. I don't know if that's true or not. I haven't done research into that, but I've heard that was a fairly common scam back then. For like soothsayers and false prophets and things. But and then this angel allegedly takes these plates into heaven so that we can't examine them, whereas we can examine the old manuscripts. And plus, there are a lot of things that Mormonism teaches that just have been historically refuted, like this whole thing about American Egyptian or whatever it is, and how like Jesus came to the Americas, after visiting the Middle East, and so it's like how can this guy is pretty smart, and yet he accepts these nonsensical claims of Mormons. I don't know. It's a little bizarre to me that someone that intelligent could be a Mormon despite all this. Oh, and the witnesses, because they have witnesses who said, "Yeah, I saw the golden plates." They're all friends and family of Joseph Smith, so they're hardly reliable witnesses. And plus, a couple of the witnesses actually recanted, their stories later on in their lives. So,
yeah, very true. And I think those are reasonable concerns to raise at the right time with any missionaries you may be speaking with, or with any Mormon friends or family you may be having a conversation with. Those are good things to ask about in a tactical kind of approach to asking about those things. And the LDS Church has the advantage of having a lot of money behind it in terms of the school they've built. And so what you find is some of the things that a lot of apologists are accused of in terms of giving these responses that really hodgepodge different things together to make a solution work. So, for example, with the fact that Native Americans can't be traced back to ancient Israelites, the accusation is that, well, we don't know which part of the Americas this was in, and that's only part of the history. That's why we don't have any archaeology for it. That's why we don't have any DNA evidence for it. Is the DNA is so far removed that this is not possible.
Yeah, I wouldn't expect there to be any DNA evidence of it. Just like there's no DNA evidence of Christ's crucifixion and resurrection, unless you accept the Shroud of Turin as authentic. But yeah.
And I'll say this: most of the Mormons I've spoken with have come from a place of growing up in the church. So it's not a situation. I have yet to speak to anybody who said, you know what, I just met a missionary one day and they told me about this and I believed it. Everyone I have spoken with, and granted, just given the nature of missionaries, that's kind of to be expected. So, again, some research into it would be great because most missionaries are young people who've grown up in the church in some capacity and then decide to go on mission in between high school and college. So, just given the nature of the sample, um, that's what you end up with. The ones who I've spoken with that aren't missionaries, most of them have the same background of growing up in the church as well. So I can't say for certain, but that's certainly what I've heard from personal experience. Like I said, yet to have anybody say, nope, yep, I converted to this just because of it. A lot of it is post hoc kind of reasoning in terms of.
Yeah, I have heard of some people being convinced of not convinced of the arguments or any evidence put forward, but they because I've spoken to Mormon missionaries. I've gone to a Mormon service a couple of times. I wanted to check it out, see what it was like, and one of the things the Mormons told me is that if you go to the service and you feel feel warm and like there's that burning in your bosom, well, that's God telling you that Mormonism is true. And so I wanted to go check it out. So I go to this Mormon service, and the whole service is just like fluffy about God loves you, we should love everybody. And it's like, yeah, of course you're going to leave there with warm fuzzy feelings because they keep talking about love the whole time. So it's like, if you're not prepared for that kind of thing, if you haven't studied logic, or you're not really prepared for how they get you, then yeah, you can think, Mormon told me I would have these warm burning in the bosom feelings, and I do, so it must be true. So yeah, so that's that was my experience with it. It was like, okay, I see how Mormons can get unsuspecting people and get them converted to Mormonism if you're not prepared for these kinds of things. Like if you're if you're like a businessman who never really gave any deep thought to religion or anything like that, I can see how you might be taken in.
And I'll say this, and this is actually a point of credit. It's something I think Christians could learn from drastically. I think the main reason that they have converts to the church is probably because of the behavior of their adherents. I don't think you would talk to anybody who would say, I spoke with this Mormon and they were the rudest person I've ever spoken with. If you have interactions with people in the LDS faith on a regular basis, they are some of the nicest people in terms of how they approach conversation, how they even take insults. We as Christians could learn a lot from that.
Hey, dingbat! Oh, God loves you. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's one thing we can take away from seeing their approach. Now, I have some concerns for my Mormon friends because I'm not sure how much of that is an effort to do good works versus genuine caring for people. Now, I'm not saying all of it isn't, but that's certainly one of the concerns that I have for my Mormon friends is this something that's put on for good works, or is it genuine care for people? Because, of course, unlike the Orthodox Christian perspective, that there's a possibility of hell, which is interesting. We come back around to that topic.
Right.
But unlike that, in the LDS faith, there is no hell for believers. I've had people tell me that, the only people who could possibly end up in hell with Satan and his demons are Mormons who have become apostate. Everyone else will end up in some level of heaven, even if it takes one or two tries to get there. So the question as to why they work so hard to get converts is something that I think is relevant too.
Yeah, well, I mean, if you can try again, then I'll just hedge my bet with Christianity, because you only get one chance in Christianity, and if I'm wrong, well, I'll try again later.
Yeah, that's the exact conversation I've had before with people because using a Pascal's wager type approach in this is a relevant point.
Mm.
Oh, we've got another comment here.
Yeah.
Colossians 1:15, which is a favorite verse of some Jehovah's Witnesses, about Christ being the firstborn of all creation. How do you respond? Psalm 89:27, Romans 8:9. Well, I will say from my personal response, and I'm going to pull both of those verses up here to read for our audience real quick.
All right.
So Psalm 89. What was that?
Oh, I said, yeah, hey, story time.
Yeah, exactly. So Psalm 89, verse 27, goes into some discussion about Jesus here, and I'll make him the firstborn of the highest kings of the earth. And then in Romans 8:9, and then I'll give how I actually respond with this here in a little bit. Romans 8:9 is you, however, are not in the flesh, but in the Spirit. If, in fact, the Spirit of God dwells in you, anyone who does not have the Spirit of Christ does not belong to him. 8:29, I'm sorry. I read 8:9.
Yeah, I was going to say, I didn't hear a first one.
Yeah, 29. For those whom he foreknew, he also predestined to be conformed to the image of his Son, in order that he might be the firstborn among many brothers.
And yeah, don't forget Colossians 1:15 also.
Yeah, so Colossians 1:15. Let's go back. And I'll break this down just a little bit. This is a text they use a lot in order to indicate that Jesus is the first creation of God. The Jehovah's Witnesses believe that Jesus is a created being, that he's the Archangel Michael, who has taken on the form of Jesus. What was that?
They believe he's Satan's brother?
That is the Mormon belief.
Oh, okay.
So the Mormons believe Satan is a brother of Jesus. And I've been deep enough, I can't remember if that's the same belief within the Jehovah's Witnesses. I'll be honest on that. It's been a while on that one, and I cannot remember that. So I'm going to pull this up, and here's the reason I'm going to pull this up for everybody is I want to actually look at the Jehovah's Witness Bible here on Colossians 1:15. So I am going to share my screen here. The good thing with a number of these groups, one of the resources, once you're a firm believer, the good thing about some of these groups is they share a lot of their resources online. So it's very easy to access their resources online, both for the Mormons and the Jehovah's Witnesses.
Okay.
So we're going to take a look at the New World Translation. As we mentioned, this is their translation of the Bible. And we're going to take a look at what it says in Colossians for them. So I'm going to read a small section here because I think it's important to see this kind of in context. So starting in verse 15, he is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn of all creation, because by means of him all other things were created in the heavens and on the earth, the things visible and invisible, whether they're thrones or lordships or governments or authorities. All other things have been created through him and for him. Notice anything about that, Clinton, that doesn't sound familiar?
Did we lose you?
No, I'm still here.
Okay.
It's very subtle.
Is it because by means of him all other things were created?
Very close. That word
Oh,
other.
uh,
So if we look up this
oh,
in,
all other things have been created through him.
yeah, so if we look this up in any other translation, it's a very, very subtle difference.
Yeah, I mean, I've got my.
Yeah, so in the ESV, we'll see that actually it says he's the image of the invisible God, the firstborn of all creation. For by him all things were created in heaven and earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or dominions or rulers or authority. All things were created through him and for him. So, not to sidetrack from those scriptures we looked at, I think they would be good ones to discuss with them. But the main response they're going to give is they're going to use their theology to kind of address those situations. They're going to say anytime that it's referring to firstborn, um, it's referring to a created being. It's referring to something that you wouldn't say he was firstborn if he was God in any sense. So they're going to be able to argue very well in terms of responding to those scriptural changes or those scriptural challenges. I'm sorry, I misspoke there. So what I would do if dealing with this scripture with Jehovah's Witnesses, and it's one of my favorites to deal with them on, and I'll show you why.
So real quick.
Yeah.
So the word other was the difference, and so because I've got my Bible up here, I use the New American Standard Version, and so it says all things have been created through him and for him, and so they throw in all other things there because of their view that Jesus himself was a created being, so all things couldn't have been created through him, but everything else could have. That's the
Right.
Okay. So how did because it also says here right at the beginning of the verse, he is the image of the invisible God, and that was preserved
Hmm.
in the New World Translation. So how do they interpret that sense?
Right. So the image of the invisible God, the example they often give when having this conversation with them is like my son is a image of me. We would say, you're a spitting image of your father, but
Mhm.
he is not physically me in any sense, not physically, not spiritually. He's not me, but it's that kind of taking that modern essence of speech and implanting it back on the text to say that this is what it's referring to here. It's like that element of speech in saying that he's the image of God.
Okay, yeah, I mean, because the Bible also says that we were made in God's image. So
Hmm.
I guess looking at he is the image of the invisible God isn't necessarily proof that Jesus himself is God, because you can draw a parallel there. So
Right.
yeah.
So how I usually approach this, there's also another tool that is good to have on hand with the Jehovah's Witnesses on their Bible app, on their website. It's there. It's one of the other few things that is a Jehovah's Witness resource. It's very important to know that in dealing with Jehovah's Witnesses, they can't use other resources in any capacity.
So they're
So
not.
they're
So they're
not
not.
going to be watching this video. They're not going to be looking at these sort of things unless they're going against the instruction of the church.
So they're not like the Mormons where they have various books. Like the Mormons have the Book of Mormon, the Doctrines and Covenants, the Pearl of Great Price, Book of Abraham, etc. They just have the New World Translation, and that's all they can use.
Well, they can use any Jehovah's Witness resource.
Mm.
With the Mormons I've spoken to, especially recently, there's some laxity. They should avoid, uh, things
Mm.
that are explicitly anti-Mormon, but they're not condemned from searching the internet for anything related to their religion and that sort of thing. With the Jehovah's Witnesses, they're very strictly cut off from
So you're
using any resources that aren't from jw.org.
so you're not going to catch any Jehovah's Witnesses on Facebook.
Not very often. There are some on there, but they're going to be very, very careful to avoid anything that speaks about Jehovah's Witnesses from anything other than a strict church perspective.
Yeah. Have you done much study on the original Greek texts?
That's exactly what I'm getting to here. I'll tell you, the greatest thing I've learned from my study with the Jehovah's Witnesses is it's given me a respect for looking at the original languages in more depth.
Yeah,
And
because I know one verse they use is John 1:1, in which they say the word was with God and the word was a God.
mhm.
And I've read John 1:1 in Greek, because I there was a time when I was trying to learn biblical Greek, and I got to the point where I was able to read John 1:1 in its entirety in Greek. I didn't really follow up with it though, so I kind of lost much of what I'd learned. But I still have the book, so I can go back and do it again. So I can understand why they would throw the a in there, but I'm kind of wondering how they could interpret the text here and get, instead of all things, all other things. Like, I'm wondering how they how they could interpret the Greek there, when I'm sure all the good translations say all things and not all other things.
You're on the right trail here, because that's exactly the issue I bring up. And I use their resources to do it, because they're not going to look at any resources I give.
Mhm.
But they have a Kingdom Interlinear translation from the Greek, which is an accepted Jehovah's Witness resource, because it was one of their resources. And it's an interlinear, which, for listeners who may not know what that is, that's a Bible that's going to have the original language laid out along with the English word. So it is exactly word for word. You're not always getting the thought of the passage, but it's going to be word for word to let you see what things are. So in their Greek interlinear, which looks a little like this, kind of crazy to get used to reading.
Yeah, because I do have Greek English interlinear, and it's not laid out like that. It's laid out in two columns: English on one side, Greek on the other.
Yeah, and so theirs is laid just right on top of one another. But the interesting thing about it is, in their interlinear translation, it says in verse 15, and I'll go specifically to verse 16, all things in the heavens and upon the earth, and the things visible and the things invisible, whether thrones or lordships or government or authorities, the all things, through him and unto him it has been created. So, as you'll see, there is no word for other in there in the Greek. So, in both the Greek and in a direct translation, other is not there. The language would be different and would be using another word included. And I've looked up what the word is specifically that is used there, but this word would have been in there had that been an accurate translation of the text. So when they bring up this verse, I go to verse 16 as well and discuss, well, what's happened here with the translation? Because this is something that's been inserted. And then we have a chance to have a conversation about, why has this been inserted? And does this directly change the meaning of the text in terms of who Christ is? Is this something that's been done theologically, or is this something, why otherwise would this word other be inserted here? So Colossians is actually my favorite thing to go to with Jehovah's Witnesses, because we can go back, we can use their resources to discuss the chapter and go through some of these changes that have taken place. So, certainly bringing up other scripture with Jehovah's Witnesses can be good. It leads to a lot of back and forth. What I do is I just ask questions about this stuff. Well, what does the Greek say? They'll be the first ones to pull up the Kingdom Interlinear. They say, well, let's look at it. Most of them haven't looked at it for this particular verse.
Huh.
And then we read through it and say it's not there. Well, what's the Greek word for other? Where's that? Why is that not included here? using questions can be a really good approach in this sort of situation. So I'm really glad Mikhail brought this one up, because this is one of my favorite examples to go to.
Yeah, and incidentally, that's why Rating Tactics is such a good resource, because it really teaches you how to ask questions in a way that probes but is not aggressive. So it puts the people that you're talking to at ease.
Exactly. And in going over this stuff with people, I would definitely use that approach. It's always better if you can ask a question rather than throw all this stuff in their face and immediately put their guard up. It's better to have that conversation, just like you would want to with any friend. You would want to approach things as delicately as possible if you're giving a friend some advice that may be hard to hear. You don't come out and bash them over the head with it unless there's no other way to do so.
Right. We need to have an intervention.
Yeah, exactly. Well, we've covered an hour already.
Oh, yeah, sure enough.
We'll see if any other questions come in. If not, I've enjoyed this discussion.
Yeah, me too.
And I think it's been fun. We've went down some rabbit trails, but
yeah, I mean, it was nice.
It's been exciting.
It's kind of nice to have just kind of an off-the-cuff conversation and not have anything necessarily planned.
Yeah, I've enjoyed it. It's thank you, Mikhail. You have made this great with all your questions. They've certainly directed our conversation in some interesting ways, and appreciate your participation here tonight. It certainly made this fun. So thanks for being with us and helping throw some of these questions at us.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I'm not seeing anything else come in, so I will go ahead and gear us towards wrapping up.
Yeah.
Clinton, will you go ahead and tell the listeners where they can find more of your content?
Well, sure. Well, you can always find me on Facebook. You can just search my name, or on Twitter, Clinton_Wilcox. You can find me on the Life Training Institute blog. That's at www.prolifetraining.com. You can find the blog in the drop-down menu there. And you can find many of my articles on the Secular Pro-Life blog, which is blog.secularprolife.org. I haven't published anything there in a while, but you can just do a search if you're interested in some of the articles that I've written. Mine are more of the philosophical bent. In fact, I've kind of been dubbed by the ladies at SPL the philosophy guy. So you can find my articles there. And I have a pro-life podcast called Pro-Life Thinking, which feel free to go and follow on Facebook. We haven't been doing any recently, but I do have some in the works. I'm working on doing something through StreamYard, in fact, to get some more regular content flowing. So look me up there, follow my podcast there, and of course my co-host Nathan, and we have some interviews coming up too. I've got Christopher Kaiser booked. We're going to talk about his new book that's coming out in October, called hold on, I've got the title right here. Just a quick plug for Chris. It's called Disputes in Bioethics. So if you have an interest in bioethics, that'll probably be a good book to pick up and read. But I'm also going to be interviewing him about it. So follow me on at Pro Life Thinking on Facebook, and you'll be able to know when that's going to happen. And I'm also working on getting Mark Newman secured for an interview too, to talk about his book that I reviewed, Contenders. So look me up there and follow my podcast, and we hope to get some new content coming here pretty soon. Those are the primary ways you can find me online. And thank you, Mikhail, for joining us here also.
Yeah, it's been great. So in addition to working on content here, I also have a page that I work on with a group of apologists over at Question Christianity on YouTube or Facebook. Put some quotation marks around that if you're doing a YouTube search for it. Again, Question Christianity. We cover a number of different topics and try and approach it from a conversational approach as we invite people in and kind of have these conversations over various issues such as, did Jesus exist? or why should we believe anything about miracles? Should we believe they even exist? And then currently we're covering a lot of current issues. So we've dealt a good bit with, the Black Lives Matter statement, as well as we're dealing with the Black Lives Matter organization coming up tomorrow night. So we'll be covering that along with a little bit on critical race theory. So be sure to check that out over on Facebook, where our live streams go down on Facebook. So check that out, and we'll have it up in a day or two on YouTube. And then here in a few weeks, we'll also be taking a look at QAnon. So Joel's talked to me about maybe doing something here on the Mentionables as well.
Okay. Yeah, I've heard about it. I haven't heard too much about the QAnon thing, but I've heard it's a conspiracy theory. So I don't do conspiracy theories, so I haven't really looked into it. But I've heard a little bit of it, like what it's about.
It straddles that line between conspiracy theory and cult, which makes it a little frightening. But we're going to dive in, take a look at the claims a little bit, take a look at what has been said from a big biblical standpoint as well, and really dive in to look at whether or not this is something Christians can get behind or not. So,
yeah. Okay.
That's a few of the things we're doing. In the meantime, if you enjoyed this, come back again. We'll do these again in the future. Be sure to subscribe, hit notifications so that you can check this out next time. We've got some cool stuff coming up. Right now, we're releasing, I think, weekly episodes on 10 questions for Christians. This is from a blog article that was released, and we're taking on the questions and addressing them from some different perspectives. So check that out. And then hopefully next week, we will be back live with Evan Minton on his book. So
yeah,
lots of fun stuff coming up. All right. Well, that's all I've got. So hope everybody has a great night.